Hi, thanks for watching. I couldn't find a video on YouTube that went through this process, and I've never done it before, so I decided to make a video. This is how to upgrade a Yaesu DR-1X digital analog version, which at the time of this video is version 1.00T as in Tango. So I have my repeater set up here with the box angled so you can see the display. I always use a dummy load power meter when something could transmit. I already have the screws removed from the top, as it will tell you to do so in the manual, and I have the cable connected to my computer. So the instructions say to be very, very careful about what version of firmware you start with. In my case, I have the firmware the repeater came with, which is 1.00F as in Foxtrot. I will be moving to version 1.00T as in Tango. This is the warning that is now on the instructions, as there are some deviations in different trains that you can jump to. I won't go into that in this video, but there are some pretty drastic differences. You may want to do some research. The Yaesu site has some information, but not all. So the first thing we want to do is check the firmware version of the repeater. So we want to turn it on and go into the setup screen. And I'll try to zoom in a little bit so that we can see what's going on. So this is the status screen, and of course if I take my HT and transmit, the repeater is active and repeating. So I'm going to go into setup, and I'm going to check that my version is 1.00F as in Fox, and that is satisfactory. And just as soon as we get started, we are going to turn it off. The next step in the manual involves us switching a switch to the program position inside, which is what we will do next. We'll remove the cover. And in the receiver section, that, by the way, is my way of keeping track of the chassis screws. Always a good idea. Keep those handy. So this is the receiver unit, and inside this little hole, there is a tiny little switch that we must move to the program position to make this work. So now if you take a look, I've moved the switch to the upward position, which they call the boot position, and I'm going to leave the cover off. As said in the manual, when you turn the power switch on, you will see nothing on the display and the fan will start. I've noticed the chassis fan is spinning. So now I'm supposed to switch to the computer. And I'm supposed to open the folder that contains the software update package. Make sure it says 1.00T or 100T in the file that you're navigating to. And it is zipped, so we're going to extract it and run it. And I'm sure that Windows 10 is protecting me. Now here's the point of the manual where it says, hey, by the way, you'll want to pick the COM port that you found when you connected your SCU20 cable. So if you didn't do that, or if you don't know how to do that, it's really easy. Go to your computer icon, which is up there in the, on my case, up here in the desktop. If you right-click and go to Properties, and Device Manager, or you can get to Device Manager through the control panel, whatever suits your needs. If you go to ports, you'll see that I have a prolific USB to serial COM port, and it says COM3. So that tells me what COM port to use. I will select COM3 from the drop-down. The baud rate window appears blank, and there's nothing in the instructions that reference it, so I'm just going to go ahead and click Update. Turn off the power switch, switch the program switch to the boot side, which I've done, connect the cable turn on the power switch, and that's the configuration we're in, so I'm going to hit OK. Alright, I've brought us back into the normal speed of time here, and we're at 94%. The update is almost complete. And it tells firmware update is complete. And I can either OK or exit. So I'm going to exit. It's not really a good... After the installation completes, turn the DR-1X off, and then through the hole, set the RX unit firmware rating switch back to the normal position, which is forward. So I'm going to do that now. So now it says we can power on the unit and go into setup to check our new firmware version. So we'll go into setup, and it says that our version is 1.00T. And that's it for the firmware update. There is an additional update with this for the DSP, however. And we'll go through that next. I'm actually not going to make any changes to this right now. I'm going to apply the DSP firmware before going further. So the next page of the instructions, so we have to connect it to the rear panel, and we have to touch and hold the LCD screen while turning it on. So let's do that. It doesn't say where, it just says to touch and hold the LCD screen while turning it on. So I'm going to just pick a spot. And it says DSP update, push display. Now I don't want to go any further because I happened to read ahead here. It says press the setup button, although push display message is displayed on the screen. DSP COM will appear on the display. So let's try it. Okay, it says DSP COM. So now I'm supposed to open a tool on my computer called PC Tool E _ version 0411. So there's my compressed folder. I'm going to extract all. Open them up in a new window to make it easy. Go into the folder. I'm going to run the tool. And we already know that we're on COM3. So I'm going to hit OK. It says before updating, make sure to follow the preparation procedure below. Connect the cable, we've got it. Connect external power to the transceiver. Turn on the turn the transceiver on and okay. I'm guessing that's really intended for maybe a FTM 400. Anyway, I'm gonna go for it. Please check the version number DSP. Well, when the pop-up screen is displayed, press OK. After the firmware installation is OK. Well, I'm going to assume this is the pop-up screen and hit OK. Okay, so it beeped and said right end. And this says firmware update is complete. After the firmware installation completes, press OK, which I've done. I guess we'll exit. Doesn't really tell you. Disconnect the SCU20, replace the top cover, and put the screws back on. This will complete the firmware update process. Okay, well, I'm not going to put the cover on because I'm going to do some other stuff here. But I'm going to turn it off. And I'm going to pretend to disconnect the cable and put the cover back on. And I'm going to then turn it back on. And I'm going to enjoy some of the new functions that have been added to the repeater, such as what are detailed here, the squelch hysteresis. Basically, it will help stations on the fringe get in a little better. The squelch is a little weaker under freshly opened conditions. The squelch tail time is interesting to me too. It enables setting the time duration of the downlink transmit after the uplink signal ceases. So most people are pretty used to a repeater these days having a longer hang time and maybe a beep. Yaesu didn't feel that was necessary. So the available squelch times that they give you are from 0 to 2.5 seconds. I guess that's something anyway. The default is 0. So we've got our programming screen with our giant F key. Go to our ID announce, and I definitely want to announce my CW without tone. I don't need it to be loud, so low is great. So under timeout timer is the squelch setting. In case you missed that, you select timeout timer from the menu and go to squelch setting. And there you get your squelch hysteresis and your squelch tail time. So you've seen what happens when it is 0. Let's take it all the way up to the max. I probably just should have hit the down button, which would have done the same thing. And then I'll go out of this, and then should have just hit down. So those are all the different settings that I've just scrolled through. So what we'll see now is I'll key up. We'll get our ID. And then I'll identify. N8CN. If you'll notice, it says transmitting for 2.5 seconds. So my theory is that Yaesu designed the repeater to cut out quickly to allow the opportunity for digital or analog stations to switch modes during that period of time in order to change the operational mode of the repeater. And if you've got a long hang time going with analog signal or whatever, or a digital signal for that matter, of course the digital signals have no hang time, so it's a moot point. I'm going to set it to 1.5 seconds. That seems about like a nice compromise between 0 and the maximum. N8CN. And then what that sounds like on the radio is this. Compare that to the default. Which is this. N8CN. Okay, so one thing I just noticed is that it unkeys very, very quickly. We'll kick it up here to, oops. Two seconds is good. Maybe they gave me a, nope, they didn't give me an option to change the pitch of the tone, which would have been nice. N8CN. So we've got a nice long 2-second squelch tail now. I don't know if you can hear the stereo separation, but on this side, on the right-hand channel, you'll hear the speaker from the DR-1X. And on the left-hand side, you'll hear the audio from my FT470. I'll show you how that's set up here. Got your speaker here, and the radio here. And I'm going to try to go a little bit further away and talk. I set the squelch tail time back to 0 so that you can hear when I key up, the radio transmits, and then when I unkey, you'll hear that initial hard squelch crash that That's the repeater speaker. If I turn that all the way out, all the way off, you'll hear my transceiver, my handheld 470 speaker squelch as well. So I'm going to try to match the volume. So do you hear the delay in that? It's like 40 milliseconds maybe. Interesting thing, if I ID right now and I unkey immediately after I say a character or a syllable or a word, that'll get cut off in that slight delay, especially since the audio is still delayed. You'll hear that when I talk. N, 8, C, N. So you'll hear my voice through the repeater speaker in real time, and then delayed through the 470 on the air. N, 8, C, N. So you heard the N through the receiver speaker of the repeater, but it actually didn't get transmitted through the output of the repeater. So what I'm going to try now is I'm going to go to Function, Timeout Timer, Squelch Setting, and I'm going to actually change this from 0 to the maximum, which is 2.5 seconds. So now the question becomes, after I've changed the timeout timer to a longer value, does it cut off the audio and just transmit a blank carrier for that period of time? Or does it actually bother to empty its audio buffer onto the air? We'll try that now. N, 8, C, N. It seemed to empty the audio buffer onto the air, which is actually good. I like that. I was going to go with a 1.5 seconds or 2 seconds, but I think I'm going to keep my timeout timer at 2.5 seconds. It lets people know the repeater's there when they unkey. It's not just immediately gone. I mean, there's a certain value in having a repeater that sounds like simplex, which is cool, and it actually encourages simplex activity because people are more used to it. But you know what? I like a beep, and I like a nice, good, quiet carrier. And hopefully in a later release of firmware, we'll see some stuff like a changeable CW pitch, maybe a real simple beep at the end of a receive would be nice. And what I would really like is the opportunity to change CTCSS tone cutout to a second or more before the carrier drop, which will effectively eliminate any squelch tail that you hear as a user of the system. If you have an analog radio and you have tone decode turned on, you're already ignoring all of the digital noise. And if you have that on and your CTCSS tone drops before your carrier, your radio will mute your audio and you will not hear the carrier squelch crash after the repeater stops transmitting. So it occurs to me I haven't tried digital mode, so we'll do that now. N, 8, C, N, testing. And as you notice, there's no delay for digital mode. N8CN, test. So this I wanted to point out while we're doing it. If you can see that, that's this analog FT470 hearing my digital noise. I'm going to turn the speaker down here so that it doesn't get annoying. So if you're an analog user and you hear this on a repeater when people speak in digital, instead of nice clean FM analog audio, here's what you can do to fix that. So in order to get into this repeater, I had to have a PL tone present. Now it's really easy to program an FT470. You just hit Function and T set, and then you can dial in your tone. For me, it's 114.8, and that is the tone that the radio will transmit in order to key up this repeater. That's what that little T in the display means. That little, maybe I can light it up here. That little letter T indicates that I'm transmitting that tone frequency. And I can change that with my function key. Oops, I need to get out of this first. Function and tone. Now it's changed to TSQ, which means now I'm also applying the same rules to my squelch. So this radio will only receive audio when there's a tone present. N8CN. N8CN test. So now we'll switch to digital. And notice we're not hearing any digital hash. I'll turn that tone off. And it opens the audio channel right up. So I'll turn on tone encode and then decode. No digital hash. And I'm still coming through the repeater in digital. N8CN. So, if we do an experiment here. There, I've set my tone to 118.8. Notice the repeater receiver light comes on, but it's not transmitting or repeating the signal. That's because it hears the signal, but it doesn't have anything to say about it. It's an invalid tone. We'll go back to the valid tone of 114.8, and it's going to repeat that just fine. Okay, so we just heard it ID. Would we have heard it ID if we have tone squelch turned on? Let's give it a try. So I've just rebooted the repeater, which basically resets its timer. And on this radio, I have tone squelch decode turned on, which means I'll be able to hear it if there's a signal present, but when the repeater IDs and there's nothing there, it should mute the audio. I'm going to turn the repeater audio down as soon as the ID starts so you can hear it. Nope, it's not there. That means my firmware update feature is actually working, and it's not transmitting a CTCSS tone while it's IDing. So if this was a link receiver, it would not trigger its signal detect to my controller and repeat that signal if I was using a PL tap for it. So I like to use a combination of COR, COS, and PL when I'm doing links, and then do an OR, or an AND logic. So anyway, we're getting way technical, and we're at the 30-minute mark. So we've successfully updated the DR-1X repeater to the new firmware. It's working as advertised, and I haven't broken anything. It's a good time to stop. 73.